Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a little out of the ordinary, something that might make you look at wine in a whole new light. Imagine you're living in ancient Rome. You're walking through the bustling streets, passing by grand marble buildings and crowded markets. The air smells of bread baking, the faint scent of olive oil, and, well, something else, something more, shall we say, intoxicating. Yep, it's wine, but not just any wine. We're talking about a drink that was more than just an accompaniment to meals. To the Romans, wine was a lifeline, a symbol of their culture, their economy, and even their health. It wasn't just for social gatherings or to get tipsy at parties. In fact, wine was a part of almost every aspect of Roman daily life, from dinner tables to medicinal practices, and believe it or not, even in their bathhouses. Now, before you get too curious, let's take a moment to explore exactly what role wine played in Roman society. For Romans, wine was a sacred thing. It wasn't just a drink, it was a key to their entire social and economic structure. Picture this: a Roman meal without wine? Unthinkable. It wasn't a mere beverage, it was an essential part of their daily routine, something almost spiritual. From the wealthiest emperor to the poorest peasant, wine was a daily presence. In fact, during most meals it was more common for the Romans to drink wine than water, as they believed it was much safer. Water sources in ancient Rome could be contaminated, but wine was purified, often mixed with spices, and sometimes even diluted with water to make it go further. It was cheap, abundant, and honestly, a lot safer than most of the alternatives. But here's the thing: wine wasn't just about drinking for sustenance. It was a symbol of status and wealth. The elite classes, especially in the empire's heyday, had access to the finest wines, which were often imported from faraway lands like Gaul or Spain. They'd even host massive banquets where the wine flowed as freely as the conversation. Imagine you're at one of these banquets, pillars of gold, food heaping on tables, and the wine, well, it's flowing in rivers. This was a show of wealth, power, and indulgence. But it wasn't all just fun and games. Wine had deep symbolic meaning for the Romans. At its heart, wine was a product of the land, of the earth itself. The Romans believed wine connected them to the divine, to the gods, and to the forces of nature. Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, revelry, and intoxication, was widely worshipped throughout the empire. Wine was seen as a divine gift, and even in their most extravagant displays of excess, there was a sense that they were honouring the gods. It wasn't just about getting drunk, there was a deep spiritual connection to the consumption of wine. Even in the temples dedicated to Bacchus, worshippers would offer wine to the gods as part of their prayers. It was a way to maintain balance with nature, a belief that through wine they could maintain peace and harmony in their world. Now let's fast forward a bit. Imagine you're not just enjoying a meal or a party, you're about to dive into something a little more, well, indulgent. You've heard the rumours, but it's hard to believe until you experience it firsthand. The Romans didn't just drink wine, they bathed in it. Yeah, you heard that right. While it might sound like some kind of wild, over-the-top luxury, for the Roman elite, bathing in wine was the ultimate sign of status and decadence. But why wine? Why not just water like everyone else? It turns out wine wasn't just a drink for them, it was also believed to have magical properties. This might sound strange, but the Romans were convinced that wine could heal the body and improve one's health. In fact, wine was often prescribed by Roman doctors as a form of medicine. For ailments ranging from headaches to digestive issues, wine was considered a cure-all, but that wasn't the only reason why people bathed in it. The wealthy class believed that wine had beauty benefits too. They thought it could cleanse the skin, tighten pores, and even make you younger looking. After all, if wine was so good for the inside, why wouldn't it work for the outside? Now, the idea of bathing in wine might sound completely out of left field to us today, but it was a practice that fit perfectly into the Roman culture of excess and indulgence. The Romans were notorious for their extravagant lifestyles, and this was just another form of it. They built grand bathhouses, which were the equivalent of modern-day spas, where they could indulge in luxurious treatments, socialise, and even hold business meetings. These bathhouses weren't just places to get clean, they were places to unwind, to gossip, to do everything except relax, alone in silence. and for the elite, wine was often involved. Imagine stepping into a Roman bathhouse, which was often decorated with exquisite mosaics and marble columns. There were various rooms with different temperatures, the hot room, the cold room, the steam room, but instead of just relaxing in plain water like we do today, wealthy Romans would step into a vat of wine, sometimes mixed with herbs and oils. They believed it was not just a luxury, it was a means of achieving perfect health, beauty, and of course a better status. For the Romans, it was about making an impression. But there's another layer to this. The Romans didn't just see bathing as a way to get clean. They saw it as a way to cleanse their souls. It was a deeply spiritual and social act. By immersing themselves in wine, they believed they were connected to the divine, to Bacchus himself. Some even thought that by bathing in wine, they were removing impurities from their body and spirit, cleansing themselves of the weight of everyday life. It was a luxury for sure, but also a ritualistic cleansing. Historians still debate whether this practice was truly for health or if it was simply an exaggerated form of decadence. Some argue that the Romans used wine as a form of medical treatment, believing it had real, tangible benefits for the body. Others suggest that it was a way for the Roman elite to flaunt their wealth and status, indulging in something completely impractical. Regardless, the practice of bathing in wine reveals a lot about Roman culture, a culture obsessed with luxury, indulgence, and the pursuit of perfection. In any case, bathing in wine wasn't a practice for the masses, it was the privilege of the wealthy, the elite who could afford such extravagance. It wasn't just about getting clean, it was about demonstrating their power, their connection to the divine, and their ability to partake in the most decadent rituals of their time. It was an embodiment of everything the Romans valued: luxury, beauty, and excess. As we dive deeper into this ancient practice, we'll explore not just why they bathed in wine, but also how it fits into the broader picture of Roman life. How did wine become so central to their culture? And what does this tell us about the way the Romans viewed health, status, and luxury? Stay tuned, because the story of the Romans and their wine-infused rituals is far from over. Bathing rituals in Roman society. Alright, now that we've got the wine thing out of the way, still can't believe they bathed in it, right? Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture of Roman bathing rituals. When you think about ancient Rome, you might picture grand statues, gladiators in the Colosseum, or emperors on their thrones. But there's something else that played an absolutely crucial role in Roman life that probably doesn't get enough love: the bathhouse. Yes, the bathhouses. These weren't just places to get squeaky clean after a hard day. They were the social hubs, the centres of Roman life. Picture this for a second. You've had a long day of walking the cobblestone streets, haggling in the market, and maybe even arguing politics with a few neighbours. Now, you've earned the right to unwind. You walk into the grand entrance of the bathhouse. It's a massive building decorated with beautiful mosaics and tall columns. The smell of warm steam fills the air. And it's not just about taking a quick dip. Oh no, my friend, you're about to immerse yourself in a whole experience. Let me paint you a scene. You step into the warm room. Your skin is already tingling as the heat wraps around you, relaxing muscles you didn't even know you had. The sounds around you, people laughing, chatting, gossiping. Maybe there's a heated political debate happening on one side, and someone is complaining about their last meal on the other. You could be next to a senator or just some regular merchant. Everyone, from the very rich to the very poor, mingled in these public spaces. It was a leveller, a place where status didn't matter as much. But the bathhouse was more than just a place to clean off after a long day. It was where Roman culture came alive. This was where you talked business, forged friendships, relaxed, and probably complained about your life. It was also a ritual, a sort of cleansing for the body and the mind. Imagine dipping your body into hot, soothing water that draws out the tension from every part of you. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was about rejuvenation, a physical and spiritual reset. But of course, this wasn't your average bath. The Romans took their bathing seriously. We're not talking about a simple dip in the tub. Oh no, no, no. We're talking about an entire sequence of rooms designed to make you feel like royalty. First, you'd go into the appetitorium, the changing room, where you'd undress and leave your clothes behind, perhaps with a slave watching over them. Don't worry, no one's judging you. Then you'd enter the frigidarium, the cold room, to close your pores and get your blood pumping. After that, it was into the tepidarium, the warm room, where you'd just sit and soak up the heat for a while. Finally, you'd move on to the caldarium, the hot room, which is where the magic happens. The heat would relax your muscles, open your pores, and get your skin glowing. But remember, the rich folks, those emperors and senators, had some special treatments. Now, here's where things get really interesting. You might have thought that a little bit of hot water was enough to relax you, but for those who could afford it, they had a secret weapon. Scented oils and, wait for it, wine. Yep, instead of just a bath in hot water, the elite were sometimes treated to wine baths or wine-infused treatments. They'd add wine to the water, infusing it with that heady aroma, filling the air with a rich, intoxicating scent. Some even had their servants rub the wine over their skin, believing it would keep their skin smooth, youthful and radiant. These baths weren't just about cleanliness. They were about indulgence, about pampering your body and feeling like a god for a few moments. But the bathhouse wasn't just a physical experience, it was deeply social too. It was common for the Romans to discuss politics, debate philosophy, or talk about business while soaking in the warm waters. And for those with a little more wealth, the bathhouse was a chance to show off just how important they were. Imagine reclining on marble benches, servants at your side, a glass of wine in hand, chatting with fellow elites about the latest gossip. It wasn't just about getting clean, it was about asserting power, enjoying luxury, and displaying your status to everyone around you. But let's not forget the actual ritual of bathing, which was integral to Roman society. For many, it wasn't just about the physical cleanliness, it was symbolic. Baths were a ritual of purification, a spiritual cleansing. By the time you finished, you weren't just physically refreshed, you were spiritually renewed. The idea was that you were washing away the impurities of daily life, the dirt, the sweat, the tension, and maybe, just maybe, any bad luck you were carrying around. For the Romans, it was a way to start fresh, to reset. And here's something a little fun and quirky. Some people even used bathhouses as a kind of social club. There were after-bath parties. Yes, after baths. Imagine it. You've soaked in the hot waters, scrubbed away the day's grime, and now you're lounging around in a toga, sipping wine, and talking about who won the chariot races that day. It wasn't uncommon to spend hours in these bathhouses, which also often included libraries, gymnasiums, and gardens, where people could hang out and chat. This brings us back to the big question: why wine in the bath? It wasn't just about indulgence, it wasn't about getting drunk or having a wild night out, although some certainly did that. Wine was seen as a gift from the gods, and so bathing in it was an act of honour, a way of connecting to the divine. Wine wasn't just food for the body, it was food for the soul. The Romans believed that by bathing in wine they could somehow improve their health, preserve their youth, and even gain favour from the gods. Historians still debate whether wine baths were truly effective or if it was just an extravagant indulgence. Was it for health, beauty, or just sheer decadence? Some argue that the wine's acidity could have had some benefits for the skin, while others say it was simply a way for the Roman elite to show off their wealth and excess. But whatever the reason, one thing's for sure: it was a luxury reserved for the highest echelons of Roman society. So the next time you step into your regular bath, just think. Roman elites were once soaking in vats of wine, floating in luxury. Talk about taking self-care to the next level. But the bathhouse wasn't just about cleansing the body. It was about cleansing the soul and showing the world that you were living your best, most luxurious life. And for the Romans, there was no better way to do that than in the warm embrace of wine. The medical benefits of wine. All right, so we've established that Romans loved their baths, and the wealthier folks loved their wine-infused baths even more. But here's the real kicker. Wine wasn't just for the socialising and luxury. It was practically a medicine cabinet in liquid form. You might be wondering, wait, wine as medicine? Yep, you heard right. To the Romans, wine wasn't just something you drank to get tipsy or enjoy a fancy meal. It was a healing elixir, a cure-all that they believed could fix pretty much anything. And by anything, I really mean anything. Now, don't think of wine as just something the Romans enjoyed with their bread and cheese. Oh no, wine had a purpose. It was more than just a delightful buzz. It was their go-to remedy for a huge range of ailments. Got a sore throat? Drink some wine. Stomachache? Wine. A bad headache? You guessed it, wine. There wasn't much that a little wine couldn't cure, at least in their minds. They believed that the fermentation process, combined with herbs, spices, and sometimes even the addition of honey, gave wine special healing properties. And we're talking about everyone, not just the rich folks who could afford the fancy baths. Even everyday Romans turned to wine as their personal medicine cabinet. But what's fascinating is that wine wasn't just a casual remedy, it was prescribed by doctors. Yes, they actually had wine doctors. In fact, Roman physicians like Galen, yes, the famous one, wrote extensively about the health benefits of wine. If you went to a doctor in ancient Rome with a complaint, the solution might just involve a hefty dose of wine. Wine was used to treat everything from digestive problems to fevers, from exhaustion to even the common cold. It was often mixed with other ingredients, herbs, spices, and sometimes even minerals like powdered gold or pearls. Now that's fancy. And it wasn't just about drinking it. Oh no, the Romans got creative. They used wine as a base for all sorts of medical concoctions. Have a wound that needed healing? Splash on some wine. You were supposed to rub it into your skin to help the healing process. It was common to soak bandages in wine to sanitize wounds, as the alcohol in the wine would kill bacteria and help prevent infections. Yeah, it's a little gross to imagine, but hey, in a time before antibiotics, you've got to do what you've got to do. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Wine wasn't just a preventative medicine. It was also considered an essential ingredient in beauty treatments. That's right. If you thought wine was just for curing illness, think again. Romans used it to maintain their youthful looks, smooth skin, and of course that radiant glow. It was believed to tighten the skin, reduce wrinkles, and leave you looking fresh-faced. Basically, wine was their ancient version of expensive skincare products. Who knew that Cleopatra's secret to glowing skin might have just been a glass of chilled wine, or perhaps an entire bath of it? Now, let's zoom in on one of the most bizarre uses of wine. Yes, bathing in it. At this point, it probably seems a little too out there, right? You're thinking, alright, I get it, they liked wine, but surely they didn't bathe in it all the time. But for the Roman elite, wine baths were not just about luxury, they were about health. The warm wine was thought to have therapeutic effects, soothing the muscles, relieving stress, and even improving circulation. Plus, there was that added belief that the wine would restore vitality and make the skin more beautiful. If you were wealthy enough, why not indulge in a wine bath after a long day? You could walk out of that bathhouse glowing, feeling like a brand new person. But here's a little twist to the story. What if all of this wasn't just superstition or over-the-top luxury? Historians still debate whether the use of wine in baths was entirely just a status symbol, or whether it really had some sort of medicinal value. Some argue that the wine's antioxidants and alcohol content could have had some benefits for the skin. Others believe the practice was simply a symbol of the excess and opulence that defined the Roman elite. But no matter what, one thing is clear. The idea of wine as a cure-all wasn't just about health. It was about creating a lifestyle. The Romans loved the idea of wellness, and they were willing to do whatever it took to maintain it. If that meant drinking wine at every meal, soaking in it during their baths, or rubbing it on their skin, so be it. Wine was their answer to everything, both physical health and beauty. And sure, while we might not be slathering ourselves in wine today, the Romans' obsession with wellness through indulgence has had a lasting impact. Look at how we treat wine today, not as a medicine perhaps, but definitely as something that symbolises relaxation, indulgence, and celebration. The legacy of wine in Roman culture can still be seen in the modern-day spa industry, in our love for fine wine at dinner parties, and even in skincare treatments that tout the benefits of grape extracts. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, so maybe wine wasn't just about getting drunk and having a good time, it actually served a purpose. And you're right. Wine in Roman society was a cultural cornerstone. It wasn't just for the party or the dinner, it was an essential part of daily life and health. Whether it was to cure ailments or make you look younger, Wine was a magic potion that the Romans couldn't live without. In their world, a glass of wine wasn't just a drink, it was a potion, a remedy, a ritual, and in some cases, even a ticket to immortality. Baths of luxury. The Roman elite. Alright, so by now you've got a pretty good picture of Roman bathing habits, right? They weren't just hopping into a tub of water after a long day. Oh no, this was a ritual, an experience, and for the elite, it was a chance to show off how much they could indulge. We're talking about baths so extravagant, so over the top, that they made our modern-day spa treatments look like a quick rinse in a kiddie pool. If you were a Roman elite, your bathhouse experience wasn't just about getting clean, it was about making a statement. You were sending a message to everyone around you. Look at me, look at how much I can afford, look at the luxury of my life. A bathhouse wasn't just a place to scrub off the dirt, it was your personal stage. Imagine stepping into the grandest bathhouse in the empire, the Thermae. This wasn't some small, humble bath. This was a sprawling complex, complete with marble columns, intricate mosaics, and courtyards so vast you could get lost in them. Inside there were multiple rooms, some for steaming, some for soaking, and some for lounging. And it wasn't just a solo activity. You'd spend hours there chatting with friends, making deals, gossiping about the latest political scandal. But let's get to the good stuff. When we're talking about the elite baths, we're talking about wine baths, olive oil massages, and scented oils that would make you feel like you were being touched by the gods themselves. The wealthy didn't just get clean, they indulged. They could afford to have slaves pour them wine while they soaked in hot, wine-filled pools. These weren't just ordinary wine baths, they were crafted. The wine was mixed with herbs, oils, and even flowers, turning the bath into a sensory experience. Your skin wasn't just being cleansed, it was being treated to something luxurious. The wine would seep into your pores, leaving your skin glowing, smooth, and probably smelling better than it ever has in your entire life. And let's not forget the marble. Oh, the marble. These bathhouses were lined with the finest marble from the farthest reaches of the empire. It wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about beauty. Imagine reclining on a smooth marble bench, your skin feeling like silk, the warm scent of wine and oils in the air, and your friends surrounding you in a haze of conversation and laughter. This wasn't just bathing, this was indulgence at its finest. But here's the thing. These lavish baths weren't just a luxury, they were exclusive. Only the wealthiest could afford the kind of experience we're talking about. The emperor might have his own private bath complete with the best wine from his personal vineyards. Senators and generals would bathe in pools filled with the finest imports, while the average Roman citizen had to make do with the communal baths, which were still impressive, but nothing compared to the grandeur of the elite's private bathhouses. So if you were lucky enough to be part of the elite, a trip to the bathhouse wasn't just about bathing, it was about status. Every element was crafted to show just how much you could afford, from the finest imported wines to the most beautiful marble tiles. And let's not forget the company, because in Rome, who you bathed with was just as important as the bath itself. Want to get ahead in politics? Make some deals in the bathhouse. Need to gossip about your enemies? The bathhouse was the perfect place. For the Romans, luxury didn't end with the food they ate or the clothes they wore. It seeped into every aspect of their lives, especially when it came to self-care and relaxation. Baths were the perfect way to unwind after a hard day of managing the empire, but more importantly, they were a space where power dynamics played out. The bathhouse wasn't just a social club, it was a place to cement your place in society. Now you might be wondering, did they really need to go this far? Was this really about health, or was it just a way to show off? Well, historians still debate that. Some argue that the lavish baths and the extravagant use of wine were just another display of wealth and status. The bathhouses were a stage, and the elite were putting on a show, but others suggest that there were some genuine health benefits. After all, the wine's acidity and antioxidants could have had some impact on skin health. It's a tricky debate, but in the end, what's clear is that luxury, beauty, and socializing were key parts of the experience. At the core of it, the Roman elite used their baths as an opportunity to indulge in their senses. to show off their wealth, and to create experiences that were unmatched by anything we could imagine today. And if wine played a role in that indulgence, well, it was the cherry on top, the extra layer of decadence that made the whole thing a little bit more Roman. But here's the twist. All of this extravagance, all of this excess, wasn't just about bathing in luxury. It was also about maintaining power. The Roman elite knew the power of public image. Bathhouses weren't just places of cleanliness. They were tools for maintaining their status, for networking, and even for securing their influence. The wine baths weren't just about indulgence. They were about making a statement to the world that you were the one in control, and that's the secret of Roman luxury. It wasn't just about enjoying the good life. It was about making sure everyone else knew you were the one who could afford it. So next time you think about a luxury bath, just imagine the Romans lounging in their wine-infused pools, soaking in not just warmth, but also power, beauty, and influence. Talk about living the high life. Social importance of bathing in wine. Okay, so we've seen how lavish and luxurious the elite Roman bathhouses could get, especially when wine was involved. But here's the real kicker. These weren't just indulgent retreats for relaxation. No. Bathhouses were absolutely crucial to Roman society, not just for health, beauty and status, but for socialization. Think of them like the Roman version of modern-day country clubs or networking events where business deals were made, politics were discussed, and friendships were forged. Imagine this. Yeah. You're a Roman citizen, and after a long day of work, or, let's be honest, after a day in the forums gossiping, you head to the nearest bathhouse. It's not just about getting clean, not by a long shot. This is your opportunity to connect, to chat, and to network with everyone from fellow merchants to high-ranking politicians. Bathhouses were the places to be. It was where you'd make your connections, gain favours, and probably get a little bit of gossip on the side. But here's the fun part. The elite had a way of making sure everyone knew they were at the top of the social ladder. They didn't just walk into a regular bathhouse and blend in with the crowd. Oh no, they made sure they had the best spot, the most luxurious bath, and the finest wine in hand. They could walk into a bathhouse and instantly be recognised, not just by their clothes, but by their accessories. And yes, that includes the wine. Picture it. You've just stepped into the bathhouse, and there you are, surrounded by gold-trimmed marble and the finest imported wines. Everyone else is watching, not just because you've got the best wine, but because you're representing Roman luxury at its peak. It's the ancient version of showing up at a high-end event with the flashiest car. The message was clear. Look at me, I'm someone important. The Romans understood the power of public perception. Bathhouses weren't just about getting clean, they were about demonstrating your status and wealth. And this wasn't just about the richest elites either. Even middle-class Romans understood the importance of socialising in the baths. You see, the bathhouse wasn't just a space for personal care. It was also a space for maintaining your public image. The more you spent at the bathhouse, the more you mingled with influential people, the more you positioned yourself as part of the elite. But let's not get carried away thinking that bathhouses were all about flaunting wealth. For many Romans, it was just a part of everyday life. Even the lower classes took advantage of the communal baths, where they could afford a cheap soak and mingle with their neighbours. The idea was simple. The bathhouse was for everyone, but those who could afford it had the luxury of indulging in finer things. And of course, wine played a big part in this divide. While everyone might have access to water in the bathhouse, only the wealthy had access to wine-infused baths, exclusive rooms, and imported goods. It was the ultimate distinction. But let's go back to the wine for a second. Not only was it a display of wealth, but it also played a huge role in the social dynamics of the bathhouse. Wine wasn't just a drink, it was a social catalyst. You didn't just sip it quietly in the corner, you shared it. You offered it to people you wanted to impress, to make friends, to establish alliances. It was a tool, a way of saying, I've got plenty, and I'm happy to share it with you. Whether it was a political rival you were trying to woo, or a business partner you were looking to impress, wine made that conversation a little smoother, the atmosphere a little warmer. Wine wasn't just a beverage, It was a social tool that brought people together in the most luxurious way possible. And remember, this wasn't just a random bunch of rich folks getting together to sip wine and chat about the latest gossip. Bathhouses were also places where serious business took place. From the very top of Roman society to the everyday citizen, the bathhouse was the stage for transactions, whether it was a political deal, a trade agreement, or a personal favour. When you were at the bathhouse, you were at the centre of Roman society, moving and shaking with the most influential people in the empire. Wine wasn't just something you drank, it was something that connected you to the empire's heartbeat. For the elite, though, bathing in wine wasn't just about showing off. It was about establishing your place in the intricate web of Roman society. Bathing was an intimate social act. You weren't just sharing wine with friends, you were showing everyone around you that you were someone worthy of respect, of admiration. By using wine as part of your bathing ritual, you were signalling that you could afford to indulge in the most opulent of luxuries. And let's face it, in a society like Rome, that was the ultimate way to climb the social ladder. But here's the thing, the more the elite indulged in these extravagant rituals, the more the lower classes began to envy them. The gap between the rich and the poor grew ever wider, and while the elite were basking in wine-filled baths, the rest of Rome was working hard just to scrape by. In this sense, wine baths became more than just a symbol of wealth. They became symbols of power and exclusion. The elite didn't just bathe in wine, they bathed in privilege. So what can we take away from this Roman obsession with wine and bathing? It's clear that for the Romans, wine was about much more than just drinking. It was a powerful social tool, a status symbol, and a ritual that permeated almost every part of their lives. Whether it was about health, beauty, socializing, or just pure indulgence, wine played a central role in Roman culture. And when the elite bathed in it, well, they were not just pampering themselves. They were broadcasting their status to the world. It was about more than luxury. It was about power. Wine and wine-infused bathing treatments. Alright, by now you've probably gotten the picture. Roman elites loved their wine, and they weren't shy about using it to indulge in both luxurious living and extravagant self-care. But let's dig a little deeper into the how and why of this whole wine bathing phenomenon. What exactly did these baths involve? And why did they think wine was the magic potion that could fix everything? First things first, it wasn't just any wine. The rich folks of Rome didn't just hop into a vat of some cheap plonk. Oh no, the wine they used in their baths was the best stuff, imported from all corners of the empire, aged to perfection, and mixed with exotic herbs, oils, and even precious flowers. Think of it like modern-day aromatherapy, but with a serious touch of decadence. You could find wines mixed with roses, lavender, or thyme, transforming the bath into an immersive experience for the senses. If you had the money, you didn't just bathe, you bathed like royalty. Imagine the scene, you're slipping into a warm bath, but instead of just plain water, it's filled with rich, aromatic wine, and the air around you is thick with the scent of rosemary and jasmine. You can almost taste the wine just by breathing it in. It's not just about getting clean, it's about indulging every part of your being, your skin, your sense of smell, and yes, even your spirit. Bathing in wine was like taking a mini vacation to another world, a world of relaxation and luxury that was available only to those with the means to enjoy it. Now you might be wondering, how did people even get the idea that wine could help improve your skin or make you healthier? Well, the truth is, it's not as crazy as it sounds. The Romans were pretty savvy when it came to using natural ingredients for wellness. Sure, they didn't have the advanced science we have today, but they were pioneers in finding ways to use what they had. Wine contains antioxidants like resveratrol, which are now known to be beneficial for the skin, helping to reduce signs of aging and protect against damage. Add to that the acidic properties of wine, which could act as a mild exfoliant, and suddenly bathing in wine doesn't sound all that ridiculous. But it wasn't just about the wine's properties, it was about the ritual. For the Roman elite, bathing in wine wasn't just a quick dip. It was part of a long, carefully curated experience. First, you would strip off your clothes in the apoditerium, where slaves or servants might help you change into your bathing attire. Then you'd move into the frigidarium, the cold room, to close your pores and get the blood flowing. Next came the tepidarium, a warm room where you'd relax and ease into the experience. And finally you'd enter the caldarium, the hot room where the magic happened. In the caldarium the elite had a choice. They could choose the water, of course, but the real luxury was in the wine. The bath attendants, often slaves, would pour the wine into large basins, letting the rich liquid swirl around your body as you soaked in its warmth. Sometimes they'd even rub the wine directly into your skin, massaging it with luxurious oils and perfumes, ensuring you were left feeling not just clean, but pampered. And it didn't stop there. For the truly opulent, wine wasn't just a bath added, it was a whole treatment. Some Romans believed that regular wine baths could make you look younger, maintain your youthful glow, and even help you live longer. It was like the ultimate beauty treatment. They thought it could tighten the skin, reduce wrinkles, and make you feel like you turned back the clock. If only modern skincare routines came with that kind of promise, right? But there's more to the story than just skin-deep beauty. The Romans were also obsessed with the spiritual benefits of wine. Remember, wine was a gift from Bacchus, the god of wine and revelry. And Romans believed that by bathing in wine they could connect with the divine. Wine wasn't just a physical experience, it was a way to purify the soul. Imagine stepping into that warm wine-infused bath after a long day of business dealings or political manoeuvring, your body melting into the warmth as the scent of flowers and wine fills the air. It was a form of ritual, a way to cleanse not only your body but your spirit, as if you were preparing yourself for whatever came next in your grand, luxurious Roman life. Now, we can't ignore the fact that this whole thing was extremely exclusive. Wine baths weren't just a treat for anyone. They were a luxury reserved for the wealthy elite. The senators, the generals, the emperors. The common Roman didn't have access to the kinds of baths we're talking about. For them, it was more about the communal bathhouses, where the focus was on cleanliness rather than luxury. But for those at the top, the wine bath was more than just an indulgence. It was an essential part of their lifestyle, their health regimen, and their social status. It's easy to see why this practice was so irresistible to the elite. Bathing in wine wasn't just a way to get clean, it was a way to signal luxury, to declare to the world that you had enough wealth to bathe in a luxury so excessive that it couldn't even be fathomed by most Romans. But as with many things in Rome, this extravagance was as much about politics as it was about personal comfort. If you were a Roman elite, you weren't just indulging in wine baths because they felt good. You were doing it because it reinforced your place in society. It was about setting yourself apart from the crowd. But let's face it, today, we might look at this whole wine bath thing and think, that's a bit much. Yet the Romans didn't see it as over the top. To them, it was just the right way to live. And in the grand scheme of things, their indulgence in wine-infused bathing wasn't just about luxury. It was about maintaining their image, their health, and their power. Wine baths weren't just an aesthetic, they were an essential part of what it meant to be Roman. As we move forward in this tale of Roman decadence, it's hard not to wonder, what would it have been like to live in a world where luxury wasn't just a desire, but an expectation? Where even your bath was a statement of power, prestige, and beauty? Let's dive a little deeper into the legacy of this indulgent practice and see how it influenced the cultures that followed. The role of bathhouses in Roman urban culture. By now, you're probably starting to see just how important bathhouses were to Roman culture, not just for cleanliness, but as a symbol of wealth, socialization, and of course, luxury. These weren't your run-of-the-mill bathhouses. We're talking about grand, sprawling complexes that were the centerpiece of urban Roman life. If you were a Roman citizen, going to the bathhouse wasn't just about scrubbing off the grime of the day. It was a ritual, a chance to engage in the beating heart of the empire's social life. Think about it. A bathhouse wasn't just a bathhouse. It was a hub, a multi-purpose space that catered to nearly every need of Roman society. Sure, it had the basic rooms, the cold room to close your pores, the warm room to relax, and the hot room to sweat it all out. But it also had gyms, libraries, gardens, and even snack bars where you could grab a quick bite while catching up on the latest gossip. You didn't just go there to get clean, you went there to live. The bathhouse was the ultimate social centre, a place to meet friends, conduct business, and discuss the hottest political debates. Now, picture this. You walk into a grand Roman bathhouse. The marble columns rise up above you, the heat of the tepidarium wraps around you like a warm embrace, and the hustle and bustle of conversations fills the air. On one side, a group of merchants is discussing their latest trades. On another, senators are chatting about the latest political scandal. Maybe you overhear a gladiator gossiping about a recent fight, or a woman asking about the latest beauty treatments. It's a social hub. This is where the important conversations of Rome took place. For the elite, these bathhouses were the ultimate status symbol. Not just because of the luxurious treatments, like wine baths of course, but because of the design. Imagine the Thermae of Caracalla, an enormous complex that could accommodate thousands of people at once. It was a feat of engineering with massive vaulted ceilings, intricate mosaics, and heated floors. The marble, the sculptures, the fountains, all of it was a testament to the empire's wealth and power. Bathhouses like this weren't just places to bathe, they were architectural masterpieces. And the thing is, this wasn't just for the wealthy. Yes, the elite enjoyed the finest wine-infused baths, the marble benches, and the elaborate mosaics. But even the average Roman citizen could enjoy the basic luxuries of the bathhouse. Public bathhouses were often subsidised by the government, and the entry fee was relatively cheap, making them accessible to almost everyone. It didn't matter if you were a senator or a street vendor, everyone could mingle in the communal spaces of the bathhouse. It was one of the few places in Roman society where social status didn't matter as much. Everyone was, quite literally, in the same bath, but let's not sugarcoat things too much. While bathhouses were a great equaliser in many ways, they were also symbols of excess. The sheer size of the bathhouses and the amount of resources poured into building them was staggering. Marble was imported from all over the empire, massive amounts of water were diverted from aqueducts, and expensive oils, herbs, and perfumes were used in the treatments. For the Roman elite, bathhouses were a way to show off. They weren't just about getting clean, they were about demonstrating your wealth, your taste, and your place at the top of the social hierarchy. The thing is, the lavishness of the baths had a direct impact on Roman culture. The bathhouse wasn't just a building, it was a reflection of the empire's values. It was about indulgence, about relaxation, but it was also about maintaining order. The Romans loved luxury, but they also loved structure and efficiency. The bathhouses were designed to be efficient. After all, the Roman Empire was built on efficiency. Everything from the water supply system to the heating mechanisms in the floors, which, by the way, were incredibly advanced for their time, was optimised to ensure that the bathhouses could serve thousands of people every day without a hitch. But there's a darker side to all of this excess. As much as the bathhouses represented Roman power, they also served as reminders of the vast divide between the elite and the common folk. The rich could indulge in wine-infused baths, lavish marble rooms, and personal attendants. The poor? They had to make do with the communal spaces, where the only luxury was the chance to get clean and socialise. It's a stark reminder of the class system that defined Roman society. The bathhouse might have been a place where all Romans could bathe, but it was also a place where the inequalities of society were laid bare. Still, despite these inequalities, bathhouses were undeniably central to Roman culture. They were about more than just personal care. They were about community, about the interconnectedness of Roman society. Whether you were an emperor or a slave, the bathhouse was a place where everyone came together. It was a chance to relax, to socialise, to network, and, yes, to indulge in a little luxury. So, let's take a moment to appreciate just how advanced and innovative the Romans were. They didn't just build bathhouses, they created an entire culture around them. The bathhouse was more than a place for bathing, it was an institution, a symbol of Roman society at its peak. And when you think about it, it's not hard to see why the Romans were so obsessed with wine and bathing. It wasn't just about self-care, it was about community care, about creating places that fostered connection and status, luxury and equality, all at the same time. And as we move forward, it's fascinating to see how these grand bathhouses and the indulgent practices like wine bathing would leave their mark on the cultures that followed. The legacy of Roman luxury, indulgence and communal spaces is still alive today, in the spas, the wellness treatments, and the social clubs we frequent. Who knows? Maybe your next spa day is just a modern twist on a 1,000-year-old Roman tradition. Rituals and superstitions around wine baths. By now you've probably noticed a pattern. The Roman bathhouse wasn't just a practical space for cleanliness, it was ritualistic. It was about more than just scrubbing off the day's grime. It was about maintaining health, beauty and social order. And when you added wine to the mix, the experience took on a new dimension, one that combined luxury with superstition, beauty with spirituality. Wine in Roman culture wasn't just a drink or a beauty treatment, it was a ritual, a symbol of the divine. The Romans believed that wine had supernatural qualities. Yes, they truly thought it could do more than just help with a headache or make a meal more enjoyable. They believed it could connect them to the gods, particularly Bacchus, the god of wine, revelry and the harvest. Bacchus wasn't just a party god, he was also seen as a healing figure, someone who could restore health, vigour and even life itself. For the Romans, rituals were deeply embedded in their everyday lives. They performed rituals to ensure good fortune, health and divine favour. And wine, with its rich cultural and religious significance, was at the centre of many of these practices. By bathing in wine, Romans believed they were honouring Bacchus, inviting his favour into their lives and receiving his blessings. The act of bathing in wine wasn't just about indulgence, it was about purification, connection and protection. Imagine this, you're a Roman elite stepping into a grand bathhouse. You've stripped off your clothes, and as the warm water surrounds you, you notice that it's not just any water. The wine bath is rich and fragrant, infused with herbs and flowers. The attendants pour it over your skin, massaging it gently into your pores. But this isn't just an aesthetic experience, it's spiritual. In that moment, you're not just cleaning your body, you're participating in a sacred act, connecting with the gods themselves. Roman bathers were often guided by rituals and superstitions. It wasn't enough to just bathe in wine, they had to perform the ritual properly. For example, many would drink wine during their baths to ensure they were fully immersed in the experience. Some believed that drinking the wine would bring them closer to the god Bacchus, who was associated with intoxication and divine ecstasy. Others believed that the ritual of bathing in wine could purify the soul, washing away bad luck and negative energy. But here's where it gets a bit more mystical. Romans also believed that wine had a protective quality. It wasn't just a substance to be consumed, it was a safeguard against evil. Some would pour wine over the threshold of their homes to ward off evil spirits. Others would rub it on their bodies as a form of protection against illness or bad fortune. To the Romans, wine wasn't just something to enjoy, it was something that shielded them, both physically and spiritually. There was also a belief that wine had the power to heal. While we've already touched on the medical uses of wine, the Romans took it a step further when it came to their baths. It wasn't just about soothing sore muscles or improving the complexion. Bathing in wine was thought to rejuvenate the body and restore youthful energy. It was said to cleanse the spirit and revive the body in ways that no regular water could. For the Roman elite, these wine baths were like modern-day spa treatments, only they were infused with divine significance and a deep belief in their supernatural powers. Some Romans even believed that the rituals around wine baths had an alchemical quality. The combination of wine, herbs, oils and heat was thought to transform the body, bringing out its best qualities and purging it of impurities. In a way, it was like magic. The Romans believed that the ritualistic act of immersing oneself in wine wasn't just about personal indulgence, it was about tapping into a powerful, almost mystical energy that could change them, heal them, and protect them. But while some of these practices may seem fantastical or superstitious today, they made perfect sense to the Romans. In a world without modern medicine, without scientific understanding, rituals like wine bathing served as a form of control. It gave people a sense of power over the unknown forces of health, fate, and divine intervention. They couldn't control everything, but they could control how they connected with the divine through rituals that made them feel powerful, protected, and ultimately lucky. Of course, the religious and spiritual beliefs surrounding wine baths were not limited to the elite. Even among the common people, wine was deeply intertwined with daily life. Public festivals dedicated to Bacchus involved massive drinking feasts, dancing, and even more public bathing. It was a time when Romans celebrated their connection to the divine through wine, letting loose in ways that echoed the rituals of their ancestors. These festivals were a reminder that no matter their social class, all Romans were connected by their belief in the power of wine. Yet even as we marvel at the extravagant rituals and superstitions of the Romans, it's essential to remember the role that these beliefs played in society. Bathing in wine was more than just a way to improve skin or health. It was a way for Romans to affirm their place in the world. The rituals surrounding wine baths were a way to assert their connection to something greater than themselves. For the Romans, the divine was never far from the earthly, and wine was the bridge between the two. It's no wonder that wine was so deeply embedded in their daily lives. So when we think about Roman wine baths, let's not just think about luxury. Let's think about the rituals, the beliefs, and the superstitions that turned a simple bath into a powerful spiritual experience. For the Romans, wine was a symbol of the divine, and when you bathed in it, you weren't just caring for your body, you were caring for your soul. Famous historical figures who bathed in wine. At this point, you're probably thinking, okay, this is getting a little extravagant. Who were the actual elites who indulged in these luxurious wine-filled baths? Well, hold on to your togas because we're about to dive into some of the most famous historical figures who didn't just partake in this opulence, they lived for it. These were the Romans who took their indulgence in wine and bath rituals to new, almost legendary heights. Let's start with one of the most notorious figures in Roman history, Emperor Nero. Nero, of course, is remembered for a lot of things, none of which are particularly flattering. He's infamous for his tyrannical reign, his alleged fiddling while Rome burned, and his bizarre acts of cruelty. But what's also legendary about Nero? His lavish lifestyle. Nero's indulgence in excess wasn't just about wealth, it was about status, luxury, and power. He didn't just bathe in regular wine, no. Nero had special wine baths prepared, often infused with exotic oils and scents. He saw the act of bathing in wine as more than just a luxury. It was a demonstration of his imperial supremacy. It was Nero's way of showing the Roman people and the world just how far removed he was from the average citizen. Bathing in wine wasn't just about relaxation, it was about the power that wine symbolized in his empire. And then, of course, there's Empress Poppaea Sabina, Nero's second wife, who is said to have bathed in wine as well. Poppaea was known for her beauty and luxury, and she wasn't shy about indulging in all that Roman decadence had to offer. One of the more famous stories surrounding her involved her bathing in wine to preserve her skin's youthful appearance. Historical records suggest she would lavish herself with all sorts of extravagant treatments, including wine baths, to maintain her beauty and elegance. For Poppaea, it wasn't just a bath, it was a statement. She wanted to be remembered as the epitome of Roman beauty, power, and wealth. And then there's the story of Caligula, another infamous emperor, known not just for his cruelty, but for his extravagant lifestyle. Caligula took indulgence to a whole new level, and like Nero, he would partake in these absurdly luxurious rituals, including wine-infused baths. But for Caligula, it wasn't just about luxury, it was about being remembered in history. He knew the power of excess and spectacle, and his wine baths were a part of that. Caligula was an emperor who understood the importance of image. He wanted his subjects and history to remember him as larger than life, a man who could afford and enjoy the finest pleasures the world had to offer. And let's not forget Emperor Hadrian, known for his cultural sophistication and personal indulgence. Hadrian didn't just govern an empire, he revelled in its luxuries, taking part in lavish baths and wine treatments as a symbol of his rule. Hadrian was a master of blending leisure with governance. His lavish baths were not just about self-care, they were spaces where he could relax, interact with his closest advisors, and even discuss the matters of the empire. Wine baths, like those Hadrian enjoyed, were symbols of relaxation and rejuvenation, but also a reflection of his power and influence over the Roman world. So why were these emperors and elites so drawn to bathing in wine? It wasn't just about pampering themselves, though there was definitely plenty of that. It was about making a statement. In Roman society, everything you did, down to the very baths you took, was an opportunity to assert your place in the social order. Bathing in wine was, for the emperors, a clear display of wealth, power, and opulence. For them, it wasn't just a matter of luxury, it was about showing their subjects and the world that they were untouchable, that they had reached a level of excess that was, quite literally, beyond the grasp of ordinary Roman citizens. The fascination with wine baths wasn't limited to just the highest echelons of power, though. Even other Roman elites, senators, and wealthy patricians would bathe in wine as part of their social rituals. The idea was that if you could afford such luxury, it wasn't just an indulgence. It was part of maintaining your place in Roman society. Wine-infused baths were about self-care, but they were also about presenting yourself as part of the Roman elite, capable of indulging in the finest things life had to offer. For the wealthy, it wasn't just about bathing. It was about showing off your ability to live in excess and indulge in luxury. Of course, some of the stories about these lavish emperors could very well be embellished over time. Roman historians were more than willing to exaggerate the decadent lives of emperors like Nero and Caligula, so it's hard to say exactly how much of the wine bathing was a daily practice for them. But one thing is for sure, wine baths, like many Roman indulgences, became part of their larger-than-life image. Whether or not they truly bathed in wine every day, these stories symbolise how deeply ingrained the idea of wine as a luxury and status symbol was in Roman culture. What's fascinating about these figures and their wine-bathing habits is that it wasn't just a personal indulgence, it became a symbol of their reign. For emperors like Nero, Caligula and Hadrian, bathing in wine wasn't just about feeling good, it was about making a public statement. Wine, with all its divine connotations, was a powerful tool for asserting one's superiority, not just in terms of wealth, but in terms of power. As we move forward, it's intriguing to think about how these rituals, these indulgences, and these larger-than-life figures shaped the culture of Rome, and how those legacies, in some ways, still influence us today. The luxury of wine baths, once the privilege of emperors, has morphed into more accessible forms of indulgence today, but the essence of it, the idea of taking care of oneself in the most lavish ways, continues to thrive. The debate, health benefits or luxurious decadence. Now that we've explored the decadence of Roman wine baths, the superstitions, and how they fit into the power structure of the empire, it's time to ask the million-dollar question. Were these wine baths really beneficial, or were they just a display of excessive luxury? Historians still debate this one. Some suggest that the wine baths were a form of ancient self-care, an early attempt at using nature's resources to maintain health, beauty and vitality. The fact that the Romans were so devoted to the medicinal properties of wine speaks to their belief in its therapeutic value. After all, they used it for everything from treating injuries to curing illnesses like headaches, digestive issues and even fevers. But when you start adding herbs, oils and exotic flowers to the mix, it's easy to see why some think the Romans were genuinely onto something in their quest for beauty and wellness. Wine, especially the kinds imported from places like Gaul or Spain, was rich in antioxidants, which are now known to help protect skin from free radicals. The acidity in wine could act as a gentle exfoliant, sloughing off dead skin cells and leaving behind a smooth, refreshed complexion. Combine this with the soothing, rejuvenating effects of warm water, and it's not too hard to imagine that wine baths might have been more than just a status symbol. They might have had some legitimate benefits for skin health, even if those benefits were mostly a happy accident. That said, let's not kid ourselves. The Roman wine bath, particularly in its more extravagant forms, was a luxury, one that very few could afford. Only the very wealthiest could indulge in this daily, and for them, it wasn't necessarily about health. It was about displaying their wealth and power. They didn't just want to enjoy a nice bath, they wanted everyone else to know that they were bathing in wine. The decadence was the point. To show off your ability to indulge in something as extravagant as a wine bath wasn't just about pampering yourself, it was about making a statement to the entire Roman world. It's easy to picture the elites of Rome, reclining in their baths, glasses of wine in hand, as they discussed politics, philosophy, and the latest gossip. They weren't just enjoying wine in their bath, they were embodying their status. The act of bathing in wine wasn't just a personal indulgence, it was a performance. It was about proving that they were untouchable, that they lived lives beyond what the average Roman could even imagine. But here's the twist. While the elites were indulging in this extravagance, the lower classes had no access to such luxury. Bathhouses for the common folk were far more modest. They were places for basic cleanliness, not for lavish indulgence. For the rich, however, wine baths became a way to distance themselves from the masses, to cement their place at the top of the social ladder. So was the wine bath a true health treatment, or just a symbol of excess? The debate is still alive today, with some arguing that the Roman practice was a form of early skincare, one that had some real benefits for skin and health, but others suggest that it was a form of excess, a way for the rich to flaunt their wealth while indulging in something as luxurious as bathing in wine. Either way, what's clear is that the Roman elite didn't see their wine baths as just a way to clean up. They saw them as a way to elevate themselves, to immerse themselves in the divine, and to prove that they were part of a select few who had access to such luxury. What's fascinating, though, is how this practice of indulgence and luxury has trickled down through the centuries. Today we may not bathe in wine, thank goodness, but the idea of indulgence for health and beauty still thrives. Look at the modern spa industry. Luxurious treatments like wine facials, wine-infused skincare products, and even grapeseed oil treatments are still in today. The Romans were onto something when it came to self-care and indulgence, and their love for wine as both a beverage and a beauty treatment has had a lasting impact on the way we think about luxury today. And it wasn't just about personal indulgence, it was about status. For the Romans, the wine bath was a visible symbol of wealth, power and influence. You couldn't just walk into any old bathhouse and expect to be treated like an emperor. The grand marble baths, the attendants pouring wine, the scented oils, it was a way to set yourself apart. It was about demonstrating that you could afford the very best, that you were above everyone else and that your indulgence wasn't just for health. It was a performance. It was an art. So were the wine baths truly beneficial, or just an over-the-top display of wealth? Maybe both. There's no definitive answer, but what's clear is that the Romans knew how to live luxuriously, and they made sure everyone knew it. The wine bath was more than just a health treatment. It was an experience, a symbol, and a ritual that defined what it meant to be elite in Roman society. As we look back on these practices, we can't help but wonder, what would it be like to live in a world where luxury and decadence weren't just indulgences, but expected parts of your daily routine? Where bathing wasn't just about getting clean, but about making a statement, connecting with the divine, and asserting your place at the top of the social ladder. Maybe, just maybe, the Romans had it right. Wine bathing and Roman identity. Okay, so by now you know that wine baths weren't just about the physical act of bathing, or even about health benefits. They were about much more. They were about identity. In ancient Rome, who you were, how you presented yourself, and what you could afford all played into a complex web of social status, influence, and cultural norms. Bathing in wine was as much a reflection of personal identity as it was an indulgence. It was about saying I belong to the elite, to the gods, to the very top of Roman society. Imagine for a second that you were a Roman citizen during the peak of the empire. If you were among the elite, bathing in wine wasn't just something you did, it was something that defined you. It wasn't just about pampering yourself after a hard day, it was about proving your place in a society that was obsessed with hierarchy, status, and display. To bathe in wine was to demonstrate that you could access the finest luxuries in the world, luxuries that were exclusive to only a select few. In Roman culture, Status wasn't just about what you wore or what you ate, it was about the entire lifestyle you led. If you were rich, you lived richness, and wine baths were one of the ultimate expressions of that wealth. But it wasn't just for show, it was an essential part of how you presented yourself to the world. You couldn't be a Roman elite without indulging in these grand rituals, and in a culture that was constantly watching, constantly judging, that wine bath wasn't just a physical experience, it was an outward display of your identity. For the Roman elite, their wine baths were connected to something deeper than just wealth or beauty. It was tied to their idea of what it meant to be Roman. Being Roman wasn't just about conquering lands or building cities, it was about embracing luxury, indulgence, and a connection to the divine. Wine, as the gift of Bacchus, wasn't just a physical substance. It was a symbol of Roman culture, identity, and the empire's values. To bathe in it wasn't just to care for your body, it was to participate in a ritual that connected you to the gods themselves. Wine baths were a way of reaffirming that you were part of a larger divine narrative. But this connection to the divine wasn't just a personal experience, it was a societal one. Wine was a communal beverage in Roman culture. It wasn't just something you drank alone, it was something you shared with others, friends, family, political allies. It was something that bonded people together in the most intimate and ritualistic ways. Sharing wine, particularly in the context of a grand bath, wasn't just about the pleasure of the drink. It was about solidarity, about being part of something larger than yourself. It was about belonging. When the elite bathed in wine, they were engaging in a ritual that went beyond luxury. They were reinforcing their place in society, asserting their connection to the divine, and reminding everyone around them that they had access to the finest indulgences in the empire. The wine bath became an essential part of Roman identity, not just a personal self-care practice, but a cultural symbol of luxury, divinity, and status. And perhaps most importantly, it was a way of asserting that the Roman elite were untouchable, living on a plane that was far removed from the average citizen. But even beyond the emperors and elites, the practice of indulgence and luxury played a key role in shaping Roman society as a whole. Wine wasn't just for the rich, it permeated every layer of Roman life. The communal bathhouses, while not as grand as the elite baths, were still filled with people who drank wine, socialised, and participated in the same cultural practices. Even if you couldn't afford to bathe in wine, you could still be part of the larger social fabric that celebrated it. Wine, with all its cultural and spiritual significance, was a symbol of Romanity. It wasn't just a drink, it was a lifestyle. This notion of luxury as identity wasn't just about the elite. It was a reflection of Roman values. Luxury wasn't seen as something shallow or excessive, it was seen as a virtue, something that separated the Romans from the rest of the world. It was about living well, indulging in the best that life had to offer, and doing so in a way that was tied to the gods and the empire's grandeur. To bathe in wine was to live in the image of Roman greatness, a greatness that was as much about luxury and excess as it was about conquest and power. The practice of wine bathing and the culture of indulgence that came with it also tells us a lot about how the Romans viewed health. For them, it wasn't just about physical well-being, it was about balance, pleasure, and connection. In Roman society, health was something to be celebrated, not just maintained. The indulgence of wine baths wasn't just about restoring the body, it was about restoring the spirit, rejuvenating the mind, and reinforcing one's place in a culture that was constantly moving, expanding, and evolving. To be Roman was to partake in the best of everything, the best food, the best drink, the best baths. And for those lucky enough to indulge, wine baths were the ultimate act of self-care, a way to honour the divine, preserve beauty, and maintain health. So when we think about wine baths today, they're more than just an ancient luxury, they're a window into the very soul of Roman society. They weren't just a means of relaxation or a quirky historical anecdote, they were a deeply embedded part of what it meant to be Roman. Bathing in wine was about more than just self-indulgence, it was about identity. It was about participating in the cultural rituals that defined Rome and reaffirmed the empire's values. It was about being part of something greater than yourself, something divine and transcendent. And in the grand scheme of things, the wine bath was just one of the many ways the Romans celebrated their connection to the world and to the gods themselves. Wine bathing in later Roman eras. Now, by this point, we've covered how the Romans viewed wine baths in the golden days of the empire. Luxury, power, and indulgence were the order of the day. But as with all things in history, things change. The Roman Empire didn't stay in its peak forever, and as it eventually began to decline, so too did the widespread indulgence in wine baths. That said, the practice didn't just disappear overnight. Even as the empire crumbled and the influence of Roman customs began to wane, the idea of luxury and indulgence persisted in fascinating ways. As the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century AD, much of the grandiose lifestyle of the elite started to fade with it. Wine baths, once a symbol of imperial power, became rare and somewhat impractical in a world facing political turmoil, invasions, and economic instability. The lavish marble bathhouses that once dotted the empire's great cities were either destroyed, abandoned, or repurposed. The elites of Rome could no longer afford to indulge in the same way. However, the idea of luxury and indulgence lived on. One of the most interesting aspects of this continued tradition is how wine baths evolved as the Roman Empire fractured and transformed into what we now think of as the medieval world. The cultural obsession with wine as a symbol of health and beauty didn't disappear, it simply took on new forms. In the Byzantine Empire, for example, which inherited much of Rome's cultural and intellectual legacy, the practice of bathing in wine didn't disappear entirely. While not as common or as widely practiced as in earlier Roman days, certain elites in the Byzantine courts still used wine and other luxurious substances in their personal care routines. Wine, as a rich and divine substance, was believed to have properties that could cleanse, heal, and even preserve beauty, much like it was thought to do during the height of the Roman Empire. Similarly, in the early medieval period, wine didn't lose its association with wellness and indulgence. It was still a prized commodity, and noble families in the crumbling remnants of the Western Roman Empire often viewed wine as a medicine as well as a beverage. Historical records show that wine was used in various treatments for ailments like digestive issues, fatigue, and even skin problems. The idea of wine's ability to improve health and beauty, though it was no longer linked directly to elaborate baths, lingered in European practices for centuries after the fall of Rome. In a way, wine's mystical and medicinal properties were carried over into the medieval period, albeit in more subtle forms. The use of wine in self-care didn't fully fade away either. The luxury of wine baths in the ancient world gave way to other indulgent practices, like lavish feasts that often involved wine, honey, and expensive spices. While the grand public bathhouses of ancient Rome were no longer in use, personal indulgence remained a key feature of high society. In this period, as the empire fractured, the concept of wine-infused self-care evolved into more localized and private rituals, often less about public display and more about individual rejuvenation. And this pattern of maintaining a relationship between luxury and wine continued to evolve even further. By the Renaissance, which was deeply influenced by classical Roman ideas, the use of wine and other opulent substances in health and beauty treatments was not entirely forgotten. In fact, the Renaissance era saw a revival of many Roman practices, including indulgent self-care. While wine baths themselves weren't necessarily common during this time, there was a resurgence in interest in ancient Roman texts and the luxurious lifestyles of the Roman elite. It's almost poetic to think that in the Renaissance, artists and intellectuals would again look back at the Romans and think of their wine baths as a kind of idealized decadence, a model of refinement, luxury, and intellectual flourishing. In fact, many Renaissance thinkers and physicians admired Roman ideas about health and beauty, and some even advocated for the use of wine and other natural remedies to improve one's appearance and overall well-being. So while the actual practice of bathing in wine didn't survive in its original form, the notion of using wine as a luxurious restorative substance was very much alive in later periods. But what about today? Are we still living in the shadow of Roman indulgence? It's almost funny how these ancient practices continue to influence us even if we don't bathe in wine anymore. Fast forward to modern times and we have wine facials, skincare products infused with grape extracts, and even wine-inspired spa treatments. Wine, in a sense, never really left us. While we might not be reclining in grand marble baths surrounded by attendants, the core idea, the blending of luxury, health, and indulgence, still exists in our modern self-care rituals. The fact that we continue to use wine in beauty treatments is a testament to the lasting legacy of the Roman elite's relationship with indulgence. Wine, the divine gift from Bacchus, may have evolved in its application, but it hasn't lost its place in our culture as a symbol of luxury and self-care. The Roman obsession with wine-infused beauty and wellness practices may have faded from the grand public bathhouses, but it still thrives in our modern spa treatments and luxury skincare. The Romans believed that wine could rejuvenate, restore, and connect them to the divine, and in many ways, we still hold on to that belief today, albeit in a more accessible and perhaps less extravagant form. Wine baths may no longer be a widespread practice, but the spirit of indulgence and luxury that they represented has endured, shifting and adapting over the centuries. From the Byzantine Empire to the Renaissance, and even into modern-day wellness practices, the idea that wine, this simple yet powerful substance, could elevate our health, beauty, and spirits is still very much alive. It's a perfect example of how something as seemingly decadent as a wine bath can continue to influence our cultural rituals and self-care habits, long after the original practice has faded. Cultural impact on modern spa treatments. As we look back on Roman luxury, it's easy to get swept up in the extravagance of it all. The marble bathhouses, the wine baths, the wine-infused oils and perfumes. But what's fascinating is how these ancient practices have influenced the way we think about luxury, beauty, and self-care today. Though the world has changed drastically since the height of the Roman Empire, the idea of indulging in luxury for health and beauty hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, it's more alive than ever, especially when you step into a modern spa. Modern spas, with their emphasis on relaxation and self-care, owe a surprising amount to the rituals and philosophies of ancient Rome. The concept of bathing as a social, communal and luxury experience is something we still embrace today, even though the scale is much smaller. Spa treatments like wine facials, grapeseed scrubs, and even wine baths, for a price of course, all trace their roots back to ancient Roman indulgences. While we might not be reclining in vast pools of wine anymore, we're still using wine's natural properties in much the same way the Romans did, because as it turns out they were onto something when it came to skincare. Grapes, particularly the skin and seeds, are rich in antioxidants which protect against aging and skin damage. Wine contains resveratrol, which is praised for its anti-aging properties. Modern-day facials and masks that use wine or grape extracts are designed to do exactly what the Romans believed: reduce wrinkles, tighten the skin, and give you that glowing complexion. The ancient Romans were using wine as a tool for rejuvenation and beauty, centuries before modern science caught up and confirmed its benefits. So in a way, we're still bathing in wine, we're just doing it in the form of fancy skincare products and treatments. But let's not forget the lavish indulgence that these ancient practices represented. We may not have grand public bathhouses, but spas today still emphasise luxury. Imagine being pampered with a body scrub, followed by a grapeseed oil massage, topped off with a glass of fine wine to sip while you relax. This indulgence isn't just for your skin, it's for your sense of self-worth. It's the modern-day equivalent of bathing in wine, where the very act of receiving such luxurious treatment becomes an experience that goes beyond beauty. It's about feeling important, feeling pampered, and in a sense, elevating your identity. In a way, Roman wine bathing influenced how we see self-care today. The Roman elite didn't just want to look good, they wanted to feel divine, connected to the gods, and above the rest of society. They used wine not only to nurture their skin, but also to embody their wealth and status. Fast forward to today, and though we don't have the same societal structures in place, the spirit of Roman indulgence still persists. We may not be bathing in wine, but when we go to a spa or treat ourselves to luxury, we're still participating in a long tradition of using self-care as a reflection of our place in society. And let's not forget the cultural aspect. Roman bathhouses were social hubs, spaces where people of all classes mingled. Sure, the wine baths were for the elite, but the bathhouses were still a place where Romans connected with one another, discussed business, and exchanged ideas. Modern spas carry on this tradition, offering more than just a beauty treatment. There are spaces of community, of rejuvenation and connection, just like the Roman baths. You're not just lying on a massage table, you're taking part in a ritual, a tradition, an experience that has been passed down for centuries. The evolution of spa treatments also reflects how society has shifted since the Roman Empire. While the practice of indulging in wine baths was once an exclusive luxury for the rich, today, wellness and self-care have become more democratized. Everyone can enjoy the benefits of wine facials, body scrubs, and even those indulgent wine baths, albeit on a smaller scale. What was once the domain of emperors and aristocrats is now something that's accessible to the masses. This shift in accessibility is a direct descendant of the Roman obsession with beauty and luxury. While the elite of Rome bathed in wine to reinforce their social status, modern society now embraces self-care as a right, not just a privilege. Of course, this transformation isn't just about skincare and beauty rituals. The idea of luxury and indulgence still permeates various aspects of our daily lives. Think about how wine is still a symbol of celebration and status in modern society. Whether it's at a dinner party, a wedding, or a high-end restaurant, wine still plays a central role in marking important moments. It's a reminder that, like the Romans, we still associate wine with sophistication, beauty, and a certain standard of living. When we consider the evolution of self-care and luxury, it's clear that the Romans left a lasting impact. Whether in grand, marble-clad bathhouses or modern-day spas, the spirit of indulgence, beauty, and health that the Romans cultivated is still with us today. We may have traded our marble baths for cozy wellness retreats, but the desire to indulge in luxurious treatments remains at the heart of how we think about health, beauty, and self-worth. So as if next time you walk into a spa or treat yourself to a glass of wine after a long week, take a moment to appreciate the ancient Romans and their opulent ways. They might not have had the latest skincare products, but they knew how to indulge, how to make self-care a ritual, and how to use luxury to elevate their sense of self. In a way, the legacy of the Roman wine bath lives on every time we indulge in something that makes us feel just a little bit more divine. Decline of wine baths and the changing role of wine. As much as we have celebrated the luxury of wine baths in ancient Rome, all good things must come to an end. Over time, as the Roman Empire started to fracture, so too did the widespread indulgence in wine baths. The empire's gradual decline, coupled with economic hardships, political turmoil, and invasions from foreign tribes, meant that the elaborate rituals of the Roman elite became increasingly impractical. Marble bathhouses were abandoned, the expensive wines that fueled these rituals became less accessible, and the social structures that supported such indulgence began to collapse. It's easy to imagine that for the wealthy Romans of the early empire, wine baths were a staple of life. But by the time of the empire's fall, these extravagant practices had begun to fade. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century AD wasn't just a political collapse, it was a collapse of a whole way of life. The infrastructure that supported such luxuries was no longer sustainable. Bathhouses were repurposed or destroyed, and wine, once a symbol of power and wealth, became just another commodity in a more fractured, decentralized world. This decline in wine baths didn't happen overnight. Even in the early stages of the empire's decline, the elites continued to indulge in the comforts of wine baths, albeit on a reduced scale. But as the economic and political climate grew more unstable, these practices became more of a distant memory for most of the Roman world. The nobility no longer had access to the same level of excess, and the once persistent ritual of wine baths became a symbol of the past, a luxury of a time that was no longer accessible. However, while the practice itself may have faded, wine's role in Roman culture didn't completely disappear. Wine remained central to Roman life even as the empire declined. It was still consumed at banquets, offered as a gift to the gods, and used in everyday life. But its connection to beauty, luxury, and health began to diminish. The wine baths, with their divine associations and associations of wealth, slowly became a thing of history. But, interestingly enough, the role of wine continued to evolve even as the Roman Empire crumbled. The Christianization of the Roman Empire in the 4th century AD introduced a new worldview, one where rituals and indulgences, particularly those tied to pagan gods like Bacchus, began to lose favour. The rise of Christianity shifted the focus away from luxury and decadence and towards humility and asceticism. Wine, once a symbol of excess and indulgence, began to take on a new, more solemn meaning in the Christian context. It was no longer seen as a symbol of divine favour or indulgence in the same way it had been in the Roman baths. Instead, it became more associated with religious rituals, like the Eucharist, where wine symbolised the blood of Christ. In this new religious context, wine still played a role, but it wasn't the same. The decadent indulgence of wine baths gave way to more restrained uses of wine. The idea of bathing in wine, of using it as a tool for health and beauty, became increasingly archaic in the face of Christian asceticism. The lavish lifestyles that the wine bath symbolised were gradually replaced with more modest ways of living, as people focused on humility rather than luxury. Yet even in the medieval period, the legacy of Roman indulgence lived on in subtler ways. Though bathing in wine had all but disappeared, the idea of indulgence in luxury as a way to reinforce power and identity didn't vanish. Monarchs, aristocrats, and the church still indulged in expensive goods, from silk and spices to rare wines, as symbols of their position in society. In a way, wine's role in signifying power and wealth continued in different forms, even as the decadent baths were forgotten. It's interesting to think that while the practice of wine baths didn't survive in the same form, the underlying idea, the idea that luxury and indulgence are powerful tools for maintaining one's social status, still thrived. The lavish nature of Roman indulgence may have faded, but the connection between power, luxury, and personal care never fully disappeared. In the centuries that followed, even when the world was grappling with the decline of the empire and the rise of new powers, the lessons of Roman indulgence would continue to influence the way societies thought about beauty, health, and luxury. Today, we see the echoes of that Roman legacy in the wellness industry, in luxury skincare products, and in high-end treatments that promise to restore, rejuvenate, and elevate the body. The focus may have shifted away from wine as a bathing substance, but the essence of indulgence, of using luxurious treatments to elevate one's identity, remains the same. In a way, the legacy of the Roman wine bath lives on every time someone treats themselves to a spa day, buys an expensive skincare product, or simply enjoys a glass of fine wine. The decline of wine baths marks the end of an era, but it also marks the beginning of a new chapter, one where indulgence and self-care would continue to evolve, influenced by the lessons of the past but adapted to the changing needs of society. Wine may no longer be the bathwater of the elite, but its symbolism as a marker of luxury and status has remained relevant in every era that followed. The Roman love affair with wine, indulgence, and beauty might have faded, but it never truly disappeared. It simply transformed, making its way into modern culture in ways that are just as meaningful as the baths once were. Reflection: what we can learn from Roman wine baths. As we reach the final chapter of this exploration into the luxurious world of Roman wine baths, it's time to take a step back and reflect on the deeper lessons we can draw from these ancient indulgences. Sure, we may no longer bathe in wine or gather in marble bathhouses, but the spirit of what the Romans believed about luxury, self-care, and indulgence is alive and well today. The most obvious takeaway is that the Romans, at their peak, had a profound understanding of the connection between mind, body, and social identity. They didn't see self-care as something frivolous. It was a ritual. It was a way to maintain not only physical health, but also spiritual well-being. The act of bathing in wine was deeply intertwined with their understanding of the divine, of beauty, and of social status. It wasn't just about relaxing after a long day. It was about connecting to something larger than themselves, whether that be the gods, their community, or their position in the social hierarchy. Even today, the way we approach self-care and wellness still carries this essence. Sure, we don't have wine baths, but we do have spa days, facials and kin care treatments that we often view as ways to rejuvenate not just our bodies, but our spirits. Wine facials, luxurious massages, and indulgent beauty routines aren't just about vanity. They are ways to reset, to escape, and, in many cases, to connect with a higher sense of well-being. The Roman elite used their wine baths to preserve their identity and assert their place in society. We may not be emperors, but we still use similar rituals to feel empowered, to feel good, and to connect with something beyond ourselves. And perhaps one of the most striking lessons the Romans offer us is about the importance of rituals and indulgence in shaping our identities. We might not bathe in wine, but we all have our own rituals, whether it's the way we unwind at the end of a busy day, the small luxuries we treat ourselves to, or the habits that make us feel grounded and in control. The Roman bathhouses were about more than just cleanliness. They were about community, status, and ritual. For the Romans, luxury was a way of marking who they were. Luxury wasn't just something they enjoyed, it was something that set them apart from the rest of society. It was a reflection of their place in the world, and it gave them a sense of meaning. Today we may not use wine to mark our social standing, but we certainly still use luxury to express our individuality. Whether it's a designer handbag, a fine bottle of wine, or a weekend getaway, the idea that indulgence reflects identity hasn't changed all that much. The connection between luxury and self-expression is still very much alive, but there's also a lesson about balance. The Romans, at their height, were obsessed with excess, but they were also obsessed with balance. They believed that wine, when consumed properly, could heal, restore, and rejuvenate. In the same way, the idea of indulgence in moderation has stuck with us. A little indulgence, whether in the form of wine, chocolate, or a relaxing bath, is something that we've come to embrace as part of self-care. What the Romans understood, though perhaps not in exactly the same terms, is that indulgence isn't about excess for its own sake. It's about finding a way to restore balance in a chaotic world. Another fascinating reflection is how the Romans, despite all their wealth and power, also believed in the divine aspects of luxury. When they bathed in wine, they didn't just do it for the pleasure, it was to connect with the gods. Today, luxury may no longer be about connecting to Bacchus, but it's still often tied to some sort of divine experience. It's why so many luxury items come with a story or a sense of mystique. Think about the allure of fine wine today, or the way we talk about luxury vacations. We still have that belief that indulgence is about more than just pleasure. It's about experiencing something extraordinary. And perhaps, just as importantly, the Roman use of wine in their bath rituals teaches us about the value of rituals in our own lives. In our busy, fast-paced world, we often overlook the importance of having a moment to pause and indulge. Rituals like wine baths create spaces for relaxation, reflection, and rejuvenation. They allow us to slow down and connect with ourselves in ways that go beyond the daily grind. Whether it's a long soak in the bath, a glass of wine at dinner, or simply taking time to relax after a stressful day, the essence of these ancient practices can still be found in our lives today. The lasting influence of Roman self-care rituals like wine bathing doesn't just lie in the material indulgences. They serve as a reminder of the value of self-care in shaping who we are and how we see the world. These rituals were not just about luxury, they were about connecting to something larger than oneself. And perhaps that's the most important lesson we can take from ancient Rome. Indulgence, when done with intention, has the power to shape not only our physical well-being, but our social and spiritual identity as well. As we close this chapter of history, it's clear that while wine baths may have faded into the past, their legacy lives on in how we treat ourselves today. Whether we're reclining in a spa, sipping a glass of wine, or indulging in a luxury we've earned, the Roman influence remains strong. It's a testament to how timeless certain human desires are, the desire for beauty, for indulgence, and for connection to something greater. The Romans may have bathed in wine, but we continue to indulge in ways that honour their ancient legacy.